Prince Andrew is demanding a trial by jury and has formally denied all the allegations against him as he gave a court in New
The grand illusion of royal grace is cracking. For years, the world adored a prince who smiled for the cameras, shook every hand, and played the role of the charming Duke of York. But behind that polished facade lurked a man far different from the image splashed across glossy magazines. Now, one former palace insider has stepped into the light, stripping away the glitter to expose the darkness within. Charlotte Briggs, once a bright-eyed young maid, kept silent for years, hoping time might soften the memories. But the truth she carried was too sharp to remain hidden. Her testimony doesn't merely chip away at a reputation, it shatters it. And as her words echo across headlines, the mask of nobility falls piece by piece. Stay with us until the very end, because this isn't just another royal scandal. This is the story of a prince who never grew into the grace of his birthright, a man who demanded obedience, thrived on humiliation, and revealed day after day the cold heart beating beneath a crown. Publicly, Prince Andrew was once considered the most approachable of the Queen's sons. Charismatic at events, playful with children, and famous for his service in the Royal Navy, he seemed to embody the ideal modern royal, a bridge between the monarchy and the people. Tabloids celebrated him as a dashing bachelor, the hero of daring helicopter missions during the Falklands War. Yet behind Buckingham Palace's gilded gates, a different story unfolded. Servants whispered of an arrogance that oozed through corridors, of a man who confused privilege with virtue. The grandeur of the palace could not hide the daily reality. Staff working under relentless pressure, expected to cater to whims that went far beyond royal protocol. Andrew's role, unlike his elder brother Charles, carried no heavy crown to justify such demands. He was not the heir, not even close, and yet he commanded an atmosphere where the smallest oversight was treated as betrayal. This contrast between the charming public figure and the domineering private one forms the backdrop to Charlotte Briggs's revelations. Charlotte entered the palace at just 21, believing she would serve a family of dignity and honor. Instead, she found herself in a world where every curtain fold, every pillow crease, became a potential trigger for the Duke's explosive temper. What began as a dream of royal service quickly curdled into a nightmare of endless tension. And in those halls of quiet suffering, the seeds of her eventual testimony began to grow. Charlotte Briggs's decision to speak was neither impulsive nor vengeful. It was survival. For years, she carried memories of shouted orders and sharp insults, of mornings when dread settled in her chest before her shift began. When she finally broke her silence in an interview with the Daily Mail, she did not mince words. "I don't give a toss what Prince Andrew feels," she declared. "He is a horrible, nasty man." Her bluntness cut through decades of royal mystique. There was no hedging, no polite British understatement. Charlotte's account came raw, each detail a blow to the carefully maintained image of the Queen's second son. She described a household, ruled not by tradition or protocol, but by the volatile mood of a man who believed the world existed to serve him. There was no kindness to soften his orders, no gratitude for the staff who ensured his comfort. Instead, there was only the constant threat of ridicule and the unpredictable lash of anger. For Charlotte, these were not isolated incidents, but a daily reality. Curtains became battlegrounds. The faintest gap between drapes could spark a storm of profanity. Tasks as small as fluffing a pillow or folding pajamas carried the weight of royal wrath. And as her stories spread across the British press, the public finally glimpsed the side of Andrew long hidden behind palace walls. Among Charlotte's most vivid memories was the curtain incident. Heavy floor-to-ceiling drapes framed the Duke's private chambers, and though he could have drawn them himself, the job belonged to her. One morning, she left the smallest sliver of light peeking through. The reaction was instant and terrifying. Andrew stormed down the corridor, his voice slicing the silence. "Can't you bloody do anything right?" he roared, profanity echoing against marble walls. The humiliation didn't end there. Charlotte recounted how Andrew would summon staff for trivial tasks, fetching a glass of water he could easily reach. demanding shoes be polished at unreasonable hours, or barking orders to move objects mere inches. Each command was delivered not as a request, but as a test of obedience, a reminder of the invisible hierarchy that kept staff in fear. Most infamous of all was the stuffed animal ritual. Outsiders once chuckled at reports of the Duke's collection of 72 teddy bears, a stuffed hippo, and a black panther. To the staff, it was no laughing matter. Every evening required a meticulous arrangement, bears lined in precise order, favorites flanking his bed like guards. Laminated instructions dictated which toy belonged where, and Charlotte endured an entire day of training for this ritual alone. A single misplaced bear could provoke an outburst. His bedroom resembled a shrine to control. Royal crest pillows demanded perfect symmetry. Pajamas had to be folded just so. Even after the animals were removed for the night, they had to be restored at dawn with military precision. What the world saw as eccentricity, Charlotte knew as tyranny disguised as childish whimsy, and it wasn't only his personal quarters. Other former staff supported Charlotte's accounts. One recalled being ordered to cross a room to close curtains. Andrew stood directly beside, an act meant to remind servants of their place. Another spoke of his cold dismissal of even the simplest greetings. Humor rarely softened the cruelty. His tantrums could transform a quiet morning into chaos, sending staff scattering through halls to avoid confrontation. Laughter was rare, except when it came at someone else's expense. A minor misstep by a maid might spark a smirk or sarcastic remark meant to wound. For Charlotte, each day felt like walking a tightrope. One wrong move could invite a storm. The glamour of royal service faded, replaced by the dread of an employer who seemed to delight in proving his dominance. Charlotte's story was not an isolated account. Other former employees echoed her memories almost word for word. They painted a picture of a man who thrived on control and humiliation, who demanded deference not out of necessity, but for the thrill of power. Even within the royal family, comparisons were striking. Staff who had served Prince Charles, Prince Edward, or even the stern Prince Philip described them as demanding but fundamentally respectful. Andrew, they said, stood alone, a category of cruelty unto himself. Despite lacking the heavy responsibilities of his elder brother, Andrew wielded his title like a weapon. He had no looming crown to justify the pressure, yet he expected worship from those beneath him. Mistakes, however small, became opportunities to remind staff of their subservience. This was not merely the product of a stressful job or the weight of public life. It was a pattern, one that stretched across years and left a trail of exhausted, demoralized employees. Each testimony strengthened the conclusion that this behavior was deliberate, a choice rather than an accident. The consistency of these accounts revealed more than a man with a temper. They exposed an environment carefully cultivated to reinforce his dominance, where humiliation was routine and respect was demanded but never reciprocated. To understand Andrew's behavior, many point to his earliest years when signs of entitlement already showed. While Charles buried himself in books and Princess Anne earned a reputation for competence, young Andrew sought attention through disruption. As a toddler, he amused himself by baiting the Queen's guards. Most children might shrink before their stoic silence. Andrew mocked them, pulling faces, shouting, trying to break their composure. When they refused to react, he grew angrier, escalating until staff intervened. Animals fared no better. Stories from royal grooms tell of a boy who kicked at family dogs and struck at horses' legs with sticks, laughing when they yelped. One day, fed up, the grooms grabbed him and shoved him headfirst into a pile of horse manure, covering him in the very filth he delighted in spreading. Even palace footmen occasionally lost patience. After relentless taunting, one struck the boy hard enough to leave a black eye. When the servant offered his resignation, the Queen herself refused it, a tacit acknowledgement that Andrew's provocations had crossed every line. His cruelty extended to siblings. With younger brother Edward, Andrew turned every interaction into domination. He snatched cakes, shoved him, left bruises, and treated their games as chances to prove superiority. At school, his reputation followed him. At prep and later at Gordonstown, classmates dubbed him baby grumpling for his tantrums, and the snigger for his mean-spirited laughter. Teachers and peers alike saw a boy who mocked, bullied, and rarely showed remorse. These early patterns never faded. Instead, they hardened into the behaviors Charlotte Briggs and other staff would one day endure, an adult version of the same spoiled child, cloaked now in royal privilege. Charlotte Briggs's account does more than reveal an unpleasant boss. It unmasks a lifelong pattern of entitlement. From childhood antics to adult tantrums, Andrew's behavior reflects a worldview shaped by unchecked privilege. For decades, the public saw a prince of charm and heroism. But behind the ceremonial salutes and camera flashes stood a man who confused service with servitude, who demanded reverence without offering respect. Her testimony forces a reconsideration of what it means to grow up in the shadow of a crown. Perhaps the palace walls that were meant to protect and nurture also sheltered a darker nature, allowing arrogance to flourish unchallenged. And so, the story of Prince Andrew is less about a fall from grace than a revelation of what was always there, a reminder that a title cannot mask the truth of character, and that no amount of royal polish can hide a heart unwilling to change. The moment Charlotte Briggs's testimony hit the press, the quiet halls of Buckingham Palace were no longer the only place where Andrew's name sparked dread. Headlines screamed across Britain, Duke of York exposed by former Maid. Morning talk shows dissected every quote. Evening panels debated whether the monarchy itself could withstand the weight of yet another scandal. Social media ignited like dry tinder. Hashtags bearing Andrew's name trended for days. Short video clips of Charlotte's interviews ricocheted through TikTok and Instagram, where millions replayed her calm, unflinching words. "He is a horrible, nasty man." Memes mocked the prince's obsession with teddy bears. Cartoonists sketched stuffed animals wearing crowns, their button eyes staring accusingly. For many ordinary Britons, the revelations confirmed long-held suspicions. Commenters flooded forums and news sites, expressing a mix of outrage and grim amusement. "We pay taxes for this?" wrote one user, capturing the mood of those who felt their respect for the monarchy had been betrayed. Internationally, American and European outlets seized the story, framing it as yet another blow to a family already battling tarnished reputations. Inside the palace, silence reigned publicly, but insiders described a whirlwind. Press officers worked late into the night, issuing careful statements that neither confirmed nor directly denied Charlotte's claims. But the damage was done. The carefully polished image of a charming duke dissolved into a portrait of privilege gone rancid, and no amount of royal decorum could contain the fury of a public that felt deceived. Behind the palace gates, the mood turned from quiet panic to strategic calculation. Courtiers convened in discreet meeting rooms, their whispered conversations laced with urgency. The Queen's communications team, veterans of countless tabloid skirmishes, drafted and redrafted statements that tiptoed along a razor's edge. They needed to defend the institution without drawing more attention to Andrew's alleged behavior. The official line emphasized gratitude to all staff who served the crown with dedication but conspicuously, avoided mentioning Charlotte Briggs by name. Senior aides urged Andrew to maintain a low profile, to stay off the front pages until the public's attention drifted elsewhere. Yet the very tactics designed to protect the monarchy revealed the underlying tension. Staff members quietly questioned why accountability seemed impossible for a prince who held no real constitutional role. Some longtime employees confided to journalists, off the record, that morale inside the palace had rarely felt so brittle. "It's like everyone's holding their breath," one insider admitted. Publicly, Andrew appeared at a charity event weeks later, his smile stiff, his eyes flicking toward the cameras as if daring them to ask the unaskable. The brief appearance fooled no one. The absence of direct answers spoke louder than any denial, confirming what many already suspected. The palace hoped silence would erase the memory of a maid's courage. But the world had heard her too clearly. Charlotte's story resonated because it was more than an account of one man's cruelty. It was a window into a culture that often places birthright above decency. Across centuries, monarchies and aristocracies have insulated their members from the consequences of arrogance. Titles become shields, and deference a reflex expected from everyone around them. Historians drew comparisons to other infamous royals whose tempers and excesses were indulged simply because they were born to rule. From France's Sun King to the reckless sons of Russian czars, history is littered with examples of privilege mutating into entitlement. Andrew's tantrums over curtains and teddy bears may seem absurd beside those grand tales of tyranny, yet they spring from the same soil, a belief that ordinary rules stop at the palace gate. Even today, when monarchies are largely symbolic, the residue of absolute power lingers. Staff members, often bound by tradition and non-disclosure agreements, face an unspoken expectation of silence. Charlotte Briggs broke that code, and her decision revealed how quickly loyalty can become complicity when no one dares speak truth to power. Her testimony forces an uncomfortable question. Was Andrew simply an unusually spoiled man, or the inevitable product of a system that still bows to inherited status? The answer matters because it reaches far beyond one prince. It challenges the very notion that privilege should remain untouchable in a modern democracy. As Charlotte's words rippled outward, other former employees began to speak, some publicly, others in cautious anonymity. Their stories echoed her own, layering detail upon detail until the picture of Andrew's private world became undeniable. One former footman recalled being summoned to draw curtains that were already closed, only to be berated for not moving fast enough. Another described how Andrew would intentionally block hallways, forcing staff to squeeze past while he stood smirking, a silent test of their willingness to submit. A housekeeper recounted a dinner party where the Duke, irritated by a minor delay in service, loudly ridiculed a young server until she fled the room in tears. It wasn't anger, the housekeeper remembered. It was sport for him, watching someone crumble. These testimonies were not delivered with bitterness, but with weary resignation. People think working for royalty is glamorous, one former attendant told a journalist. But for us it was survival. You learned to disappear when he walked by. Each account reinforced Charlotte's depiction of a man who treated kindness as weakness and obedience as his birthright. And each voice added weight to a growing consensus. Andrew's behavior was not an aberration, but a daily reality, endured in silence until someone dared to speak. Experts soon joined the conversation, offering measured but striking analyses. Psychologists pointed to the phenomenon of arrested development, where childhood indulgence prevents normal emotional growth. Dr. Helena Marks, a London-based behavioral specialist, suggested that Andrew's obsession with control, whether over curtains or stuffed animals, hinted at a deep insecurity masked by aggression. Children, who are never told no, often struggle with boundaries as adults, she explained in a televised interview. When the world has always revolved around them, they interpret simple limits as personal attacks. Tantrums become their language. Royal biographers added historical context, noting how the Queen's affection for her favorite son may have amplified the problem. Unlike Charles, burdened with future kingship, Andrew faced few responsibilities and little discipline. He was given all the privilege with none of the pressure, one biographer observed. That combination can be toxic. These insights did not excuse his actions, but illuminated the forces that shaped him. They suggested that Andrew's behavior was not mere eccentricity, but a predictable outcome of a life insulated from consequence. A boy who never learned that respect is earned, not demanded. As months passed, the uproar surrounding Charlotte Briggs's revelations settled into something more enduring, a reassessment of what the monarchy represents in the modern era. Polls showed a dip in public support, particularly among younger Britons who questioned why a family funded by taxpayers should remain immune to accountability. For Andrew, the personal consequences were severe. Invitations to high-profile events dwindled. Charitable organizations quietly distanced themselves. Though he retained his title, he became a ghost within the very institution that once defined him. But the larger story was never just about one man. It was about the power of truth to pierce centuries of deference. Charlotte's courage inspired a new conversation about how institutions, royal or otherwise, protect those at the top while silencing those below. In the end, Andrew's legacy may not be measured by naval service or ceremonial duties, but by the cautionary tale he embodies. Titles fade, pageantry passes. What remains is character, and character, once revealed, cannot be hidden again. The prince who demanded obedience now stands as a reminder that no crown can shield a man from the truth. Within Buckingham Palace, Andrew's absence soon became as noticeable as his once boisterous presence. Corridors that had echoed with his impatient footsteps fell silent. Staff members who once ducked into side rooms at the sound of his voice now moved freely, remarking on the strange calm. "It feels lighter," one longtime attendant confided to a reporter off the record. The hush wasn't merely physical. It carried a sense of release, as though the building itself exhaled after years of tension. Behind closed doors, the revelations deepened rifts within the royal family. Charles, newly ascended as king, faced the awkward duty of balancing brotherly loyalty with the monarchy's reputation. Private family gatherings grew tense. Camilla maintained her practiced diplomacy, but other relatives were less restrained. Sources whispered of frosty silences and of Princess Anne's blunt remark that Andrew had written his own story. The Queen's passing only intensified the scrutiny. At memorial services, photographers captured Andrew standing slightly apart, a solitary figure among his kin. Every sideways glance was parsed for hidden meaning. Public opinion hardened. Polls showed that a growing majority believed Andrew should relinquish his remaining titles. Editorials questioned why taxpayer funds should protect someone so widely discredited. Street interviews revealed a mix of anger and resignation. "If this were anyone else, he'd be held accountable," one Londoner said. Across the Commonwealth, Republic movements seized the moment, arguing that hereditary privilege had no place in modern governance. In Australia and Canada, debates about severing ties to the crown gained fresh momentum. Citing Andrew's scandal as emblematic of a deeper problem, charitable organizations, once eager to host a royal patron, quietly cut ties. Invitations stopped arriving. Fundraisers removed his name from brochures, replacing it with neutral wording or leaving the space blank. For charities dependent on goodwill, the risk of association outweighed the prestige of royal backing. "We simply couldn't justify it to our donors," explained one director who asked not to be named. Andrew's calendar, once dotted with high-profile galas, emptied. Each cancellation underscored the speed with which public trust evaporates when revelations expose a darker reality. In the wake of the uproar, the royal household quietly introduced new staff welfare measures. Internal grievance channels were strengthened. Mandatory training on workplace respect became routine, and senior aides began conducting anonymous surveys to gauge morale. Officially, these steps were described as part of ongoing modernization, but insiders admitted that the Briggs revelations were the catalyst. While the monarchy avoided any admission of fault, the reforms spoke volumes. For staff members long accustomed to silent endurance, even small changes, a confidential helpline, clearer reporting lines, felt revolutionary. Historians and constitutional scholars now cite the Andrew episode as a turning point. It exposed the fragility of an institution that relies on deference and secrecy. "The monarchy survived wars and political upheavals," noted historian Dr. Ellis Harrow, "but modern transparency is a different battlefield." The scandal became a case study in leadership seminars and university courses, examining how privilege without accountability corrodes trust. Students debated whether hereditary roles can coexist with the demands of a democratic, media-saturated age. Andrew himself remains largely invisible. Neighbors near his private residence report infrequent sightings, a solitary walk at dusk, a fleeting figure behind tinted car windows. Friends say he spends hours reading newspapers and watching coverage of his own downfall, alternating between anger and weary acceptance. "He feels misunderstood," one longtime acquaintance offered. "But he also knows he created this reality. The once gregarious prince who thrived on public attention now lives in self-imposed shadow, a quiet that contrasts sharply with the noise of the world that finally saw him clearly. Years may pass, but the stories refuse to fade. Each time a documentary or podcast revisits the royal family's controversies, Prince Andrew's name inevitably resurfaces. Former staffers who once feared retaliation now speak openly at panel discussions and university events, reinforcing the picture Charlotte Briggs first painted. Tabloids keep the embers glowing with "Where is he now?" updates, while historians cite his saga as a cautionary tale of unchecked privilege. Among the British public, Andrew has shifted from an active scandal to a living reminder, a cautionary figure parents invoke when discussing respect and accountability. Even school curriculums that cover modern British history have begun to treat the Briggs revelations as a turning point, an example of how old hierarchies can crumble under the weight of testimony and persistent media scrutiny. Legacy, once the prince's birthright, is now the battlefield he cannot win. Where official biographies once celebrated naval service and royal duties, new editions highlight disgrace and withdrawal. Biographers note that archives and libraries catalog his name beside words like controversy, scandal, and abuse of privilege. Even charitable contributions that once bore his signature are reinterpreted through a harsher lens, seen less as acts of goodwill and more as attempts to polish a tarnished image. Future generations of royals will inherit a family narrative indelibly marked by his actions. Yet within this rewriting lies a broader truth. The idea that titles and ancestry can shield someone forever has been irreversibly challenged. Andrew's story is no longer just his own. It is a symbol of how modern society, armed with voices like Charlotte Briggs's, can hold even the most insulated figures to account. In that sense, the prince who once demanded deference has unintentionally become an emblem of change, a reminder that no crown can protect a person from the consequences of their character.